Hello everybody. Hope everybody's enjoying the day and also the course. Today we want to talk about strategy. Strategy is an often misunderstood word. In fact, most of us have some type of strategy. We follow strategy in order to purchase a home, purchase a car. Just about anything that happens in our lives follows some type of strategy. Even a quick answer or a quick decision results from some type of strategy. There are some people that believe that making decisions from your gut instinct, we call it, is a better strategy than following one where there's a clear and deliberate course of action that a person may take. So both are related to some type of strategy. The issue is, when best should you follow some type of prescribed, coordinated type of strategy, when maybe you should, as I say, kind of fly at the seat of your pants, or make a quick decision without giving it much thought or deliberation. So for this presentation, we want to talk a little bit about strategy, strategic planning, what strategy is, and why the term sounds so foreign or even so intimidating to some, when it's really not. We use strategy certainly in our personal and professional lives, as mentioned, but within the business world, we use it in just about any profession. Human resources is one that comes straight to mind. Human resources professionals are charged with making some of the most important and critical decisions in an organization. So they have to make the right decision at the right time and for the right reasons. Those that work in finance, even sales, are heavily involved, spend an exorbitant amount of time on strategy, especially in finance, when you're trying to determine the best way to generate funds within the organization, the best areas to spend those funds, whether it's investments or in some type of compensation for your employees. All those follow strategy. So let's talk about what strategy is and what it's not. A good definition of strategy is it's really just a set of decisions. That's all it is. It's a set of decisions that one takes in order to achieve some type of objective, some end goal. One of the ways that I often define strategy is, if you live on the first floor and then there's a second floor, the strategy to get from the first floor to the second floor often involves going up a series of steps. Those steps is the strategy to get from the first floor to the second floor. Very basic, but certainly understood. It's the way in which you move within the organization. In business, we use strategies to develop what we call our core competencies, and we'll talk about that in a second, to achieve, our hope is, a competitive advantage. We'll talk about that in a second. And the hope is that we outperform our competitors. So some of the key words are core competencies, competitive advantage, and competitors. So let's talk about each one of those now. What are core competencies? Core competencies are those unique skills and abilities that within the organization give them something, allow them to develop something that translates into a competitive advantage. A good example on the personal side is talent. Core competencies is very similar to a talent that a person has. For instance, somebody may be musically inclined. That is their talent. But is that their competitive advantage? Only if they utilize that core competency of musical ability and devote the time and energy to make it a competitive advantage. Using another example, there's quite a few individuals who are tall, 6'6", 6'8", 6'10", and you would naturally believe that they have a talent for basketball. And the reason is you're closer to the rim, and therefore you should be able to, the thought is, should be able to do well in basketball. But if you never learn how to dribble a basketball, or even to shoot, the ability of you to perfect your talent is certainly suspect. So although you may have had a talent that could have resulted in you being a quite successful basketball player, you never perfected that talent, therefore it remained a core competency, but not a competitive advantage. Within a business, a core competency could be something as simple as they have quite a bit of money in the bank. So money could be a core competency. It's something that they're good at. It's a skill or an ability. Or they may have some innovative type of marketing skills. And as a result of those innovative type of marketing skills, they could be seen at the forefront of their industry. There are some organizations that are quite good at marketing their product. Kentucky Fried Chicken, or KFC, came up with an advertisement some years ago that thoroughly dominated the industry for a while. There was also Wendy's. Wendy's hamburgers came up with their infamous "Where's the Beef" commercial, where they talked about how some hamburger stands didn't use a lot of meat in their hamburgers, whereas with Wendy's, you can actually see the hamburger that they put into your hamburger, the hamburger meat. So they call it "Where's the Beef" to highlight that we have beef at Wendy's, others do not. Toilet paper is another great example. Charmin. Mr. Whipple came out with a campaign that went for years and years. Don't squeeze the Charmin. It was so unbelievably soft that people always wanted to squeeze the Charmin toilet paper. And that ad went for a number of years and was highly successful in promoting Charmin. So the core competency that they had was that they had this marketing prowess. And that turns into what we know as a competitive advantage. That is that one advantage that you have over your competitors. And it could be the taste of your product, it could be the feel of your product, it could be the relationships that you build when you go to sell your product within the market. So core competencies are important and competitive advantage are important. Both of those are intended to allow you as an organization to outperform your competitors. So when we start to define our strategies, we start to look first, and we'll talk more about this in a couple slides. We start to talk first about what is it that our organization does well. That's why we try to identify our core competencies. And through those core competencies, we try to identify that one or two competitive advantages that we have that nobody else has. Again, if you're in the fast food restaurants and you're McDonald's, you want to have that one or two core competencies that nobody else has that's going to allow you to outperform your market. If you're in the IT field, you want to be able to be known as maybe at the forefront or innovator within your field. And that draws competitors and also draws customers to your firm. It draws competitors because competitors are going to look at what you're doing because they know that you have a competitive advantage that they don't, and that's causing some disruption within their firm because they can't compete at the level that they would like to compete. So through our strategies, as mentioned, we identify our core competencies and then our competitive advantage. We hope that once we identify our competitive advantage, we hope that it's what we call compensable. Compensable means that we can do something with it. For instance, if you have a lot of money in your organization, but money isn't a driver within your industry, then you have a core competency and a competitive advantage that is not what we call compensable, which means there's really not much that we can do with it. So, as we look at our organization, we need to find out where we are so that we can determine where we want to go. And once we have those two cornerstones, we can then create the strategy to achieve our objectives. Let's talk about that in greater detail. A strategic process, strategic management process, is composed of three components. And then we'll talk later about how to develop a strategic plan, which is that middle component. But a strategy is really involved with determining where you're at as an organization, determining where you want to go as an organization. And those set of strategies, which you can also call tactics, are those things that are going to allow you to get from where you are to where you want to go. We call that a strategic plan. And within the strategic plan, there's basically 5 steps that we're going to be talking about. Again, the strategic plan is that middle part of a strategy. It comes about because there's an understanding and a realization that you understand where your organization is, you have a clear understanding of where your organization wants to go. And that middle part is the strategic plan. How are we going to get there? The best one-word definition I often give for a strategic plan is how. It's the how. And so we do that in 5 steps. We do an internal or company analysis and external company analysis. We determine the direction of the organization. We create an action plan, and then we create a contingency plan. Of those 5 steps, all are important. Most or many don't do a step 5, which is a contingency plan. We're going to talk about that. And maybe the most important is this step 3, which is trying to figure out where your organization needs to go. You can determine where your organization needs to go even if you don't do steps 1 or 2. The problem is if you know where your organization needs to go, but you haven't done an assessment of the capabilities of your organization, then you really have no idea whether your organization can reach that objective that you have just set. That's why it's so critical that you understand where your organization is, and then you can determine whether not only the direction you want to go, but whether the organization can actually get there. So let's talk about each step. It's a fascinating analysis, by the way. Analysis or analyst, the word just means break apart. So if somebody is an analyst, their job is really breaking apart whatever they do. So if they're a financial analyst, if they're a health analyst, there's a wide variety, a broad scope of analysts. And their role really is to break apart an organization to determine how that organization operates. And then, hopefully when you put it back together, you put back the pieces of that puzzle in a better shape than when you disassembled it. So the internal analysis does some of what we talked about earlier. This is where you get a picture. We call it the health. It's the health of an organization. It's the internal analysis. The best example that you may want to consider is when you go to a doctor. The doctor takes out a number of tools to get a sense on your health. They'll take your blood pressure. They'll take your temperature. And so there's a number of aspects that they're going to do to see how well your body is doing. In some cases, they'll take a blood sample and do a blood test to look at the blood within your system. All of those provide information to a doctor that they then can make an assessment on your overall health. It doesn't give a comprehensive view of your health. You'd have to do quite an invasive and comprehensive type of investigation. But it does give you a sense on the most important, that's what we call them vital signs, the most important vital signs to assess to determine somebody's preliminary health. It's the same within an organization. We're going to look at their mission and vision, which tells others about the product and the industry that an organization works within. We're going to determine their values, creeds, beliefs, and aspirations. We're going to determine if these are appropriate for the organization. They may have been at some point, and they may not be now, but we're certainly going to make that assessment. Then we're going to analyze the financial, human, and physical strengths and weaknesses of the organization, whether it's management, leaders, employees, vendors, customers, whatever it may be. And our key deliverable here is to determine the core competencies. By now, we should see that each of these aspects in a strategic plan is directly tied to what we know about a strategy and what we know about creating a strategic plan. So this is where, on the left hand, we would say that we're trying to figure out where the organization is. As part of trying to determine where the organization is, it's actually a 2-step process. And the second step is the external analysis. So we broke apart our organization and determined some aspects. Now we have to do the same for our competitors. We have to look, as they often say, across the pond, whether that's across the street or across the state or across the country, to find out how are we doing in relation to others in this industry. This is where we get a picture in the health of the industry. The first one was to get a picture of the health of the organization. That was the internal analysis. The external analysis is to get a picture of the health of the organization. Why is that important? It's important because if the organization is healthy, but the industry is not, then you're going to be a healthy organization in an industry that is going bankrupt. And we certainly don't want that. And so we need to assess our competitors and the industry. We perform a number of tests, again, similar to going to a physician. SWOT is strategically utilized in an organization by researching the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. PEST, five forces. There's also quite a few other. There's PESTEL. So there's probably about a half dozen tools that we use in order to obtain some information on the health of the industry going forward. All have as their basis some kind of assessment on certain particulars that give you an overall understanding of the industry. We mentioned about SWOT. PEST and PESTEL will look at things like the political arena, the economic arena. They look at environmental areas. So each of these acronyms stand for something within the organization and within the industry. And by assessing each aspect, you then can make a more informed decision on the future of your organization. Another tool that's used is the environmental scan, and it's very similar to the SWOT and PEST and PESTEL and quite a few of the others that we have very similar to these acronyms. The environmental scan is exactly what it says. You scan the environment. Again, that's why we look at the external. Now, you can look at the internal environment, but hopefully you've done that in step one. So you look at two areas with the environmental scan. You look at the remote and the industry. The remote is one that occur no matter what your industry is. For instance, if the interest rate is going up, it's not just going up because you're in the restaurant field. It's going up no matter what field you're in. It impacts some industries more. For instance, home building, construction is greatly influenced by the cost of capital, we call it. When the interest rate goes up, it's called cost of capital. But then we look specifically in the industry, and this is where we look at supplier power, buyer power, competitive rivalry, and substitute availability. That's where, really, when we look at this industry, Porter's five forces comes to mind. Porter was a teacher at Harvard and came up with five forces like the substitute of products, and there's four others that you look at to determine the overall health and viability of an organization. The key deliverable here, again, is to determine the company's competitive advantage. You'll see that step 1 and 2 are intricately involved with determining, upon their conclusion, the competitive advantage of the organization. Which brings us to step 3, which is to determine the direction. This is the most difficult. This is the most important. Why is it difficult? It's difficult because if every organization knew where they needed to go, then they would have a sense of foresight and foreshadowing that will serve their organization well. It's no different than if you want to buy a house. Is the interest rate going to be up or lower in 6 months? We simply don't know. And that has a tremendous advantage on whether we buy now or buy later. If you knew what your customers were hoping to have in the future, that would be great. But oftentimes, customers don't know what they want because they don't know what's available. Kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg. We don't know which. If the organization builds it, will people buy it? Or if the organization, or if your customers demand it, will the organization produce it? You can see that it's difficult to determine the answer. Organizations on a continual basis spend thousands, if not millions, if not billions, developing a product, and they may have some research on whether that product will do well, but they certainly don't know until it gets into the market. In general, though, when we try to determine the direction of the organization, we look at a couple of what we would call broad objectives. We want to say something like, our objective is to increase productivity by X%, or we want to be a technological leader. Most people would say that's, of course, we always want to be a leader. Not necessarily. Walmart's a great example. Walmart pretty much did the same thing that Sears and Woolworths and others have done, which was that they made their money based on profit. They wanted to sell as much as they can, in the hope in relation to productivity, technological leadership, profitability. What we want to do is sell as much as we can, make as much profit as we can, and if we have profit, it gives us much more of many more strategies to follow, whether it's increasing this budget or research and development, increasing the salaries of employees. So there's many different objectives that we would have. Profit is just one. There's some organizations like Uber who've not made a profit for a number of years and they follow a growth strategy. But they should have some type, and this is the important part of step 3, they should have some type of direction in terms of where they expect to be in the coming years. Years is intentionally left vague. It depends on your industry. It could be a number of years before an organization realizes some profit. Amazon's a good example. Amazon lost quite a bit of money its first years, and now the person who started that firm, Amazon, is either 1 or 2 in terms of the richest person in the world. I believe Elon Musk is up there somewhere as well, too. So those are a number of aspects that we'll look at when we create these broad objectives, from productivity to technological leadership to profitability to competitive position to market share, and then also products. Those are going to determine the direction. So as we know, we've now looked at the left side of our body in a way, which is the left hand, which is where we're at. Now we've looked at the right side of our body, or the right hand, which is where we want to go. And now we're doing the middle, which is how are we going to get there? This is where we create what's called an action plan. This is where we translate our objectives into actions. How does this work in an organization? Typically, senior management or upper leadership is the one that creates these types of long-term goals. When they determine the direction, it is senior management that says, along with the board of directors or the president of the organization, and they say, this is where we want to position ourselves. This is where we need to be. And then they go to their senior managers and others, if it's first-line managers or maybe even supervisors, and say, here's where we want to go. We have a clear idea of where we want to go. You need to create strategies that help us get there. And so that's where you translate where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow. And you hope you have managers that are able to create these types of minute strategies that allow them to hire the right people and to develop the tactics and the short-term goals that over time would allow you to reach the long-term objectives that has been set by the organization. Key deliverable here is really where the organizational structure, the organizational design comes into play. You design an organization that's going to allow you to achieve these objectives. Sometimes it may actually result in an organization that purchases another organization to help them achieve those objectives. They may merge with an organization because another organization has talents, has, again, the terms we used earlier, core competencies, maybe even competitive advantages that will help this organization get there. So rather than create it on your own as an organization, you may purchase talent from other organizations. And then you get into the aspects of when you develop the implementation, there's some concerns. During this action plan, when you create the action plan, you may want to hire a consultant. Maybe you don't have the in-house talent that's going to allow you to create these types of short-term strategies. So you may bring in a consultant. And you have to make sure that the organization understands that they will benefit from this strategic direction and strategic plan. Change is something that's quite easy for a number of people. I often say that if you benefit from change, there's nobody who would say no. If I came up to somebody tomorrow and said, I'm going to increase your pay 100% and you don't have to do anything differently, most people would say, that's great, I love that change. But if they were to decrease their pay, they would say, well, I don't like that change, I'm not going to be for it. So whenever we craft a strategic plan, and the main reason we have a strategic plan is because we need to determine our direction. We need to go maybe in a different direction. That's an important aspect, of course. And so now that we've created this kind of strategic direction, we need employees to help us get there. And that's why we need to, when we promote this strategy and strategic direction, we make sure that we showcase to employees how they are directly going to benefit from this new direction. The third thing that we have when we're developing this action plan is determine who should be involved. There's some occasions where you would want finance, you would want purchasing, you would want HR, you would want IT. And there's some where you don't. And so you need to make very clear. Being forthright is a great advantage here. And then have some credibility. The individuals in the organization have to look at that plan and say, it's going to work. I believe in that plan. I can see how they developed it. It seems, and the key word for me is logical. It seems like a logical process that they've outlined. The direction seems logical. Logical is an orderly series of thoughts. And that gives you credibility. Even when it's difficult, it gives you credibility to state that we're on the right track. We may not be where we want to be yet, but we're definitely on the right track. Guiding coalition is a group of people who are greatly in favor of what you want to do and where you want to be. And so if you can garner the support of influential individuals within an organization, it can only serve you well. And that brings us to among the last, which is the contingency plan. I sometimes give this step more time than some of the others. And the reason is because it's not done. It's almost like an evaluation, hence the word evaluation again. It's almost like an evaluation. People don't evaluate too much. They want to go on to the next step. And we know that evaluations are a key component of an organization's success. It is for that reason that we even think that organizations should be done on a quarterly basis. Some are saying monthly, but certainly on a quarterly basis. If you wait a whole year, 12 months, in order to highlight somebody's poor performance and attention to detail, whatever it may be, you may have lost valuable time where they could have corrected their behavior earlier, and it may have been something that advantaged the organization. But since it hasn't been addressed, then the employee is continuing on that track, and unfortunately, they can do some damage to the organization when it could have been addressed earlier. Contingency plan is along that line. It says, if we don't achieve our plan, what should we do instead? It's almost like an if-then statement. If we don't increase sales 10% by X date, our contingency plan requires us to. When we get into the heat of the battle, when we get into a situation where our plans are not resulting in a manner in which we thought, we have to make changes. It can be a stressful time to make changes if we haven't thought it through and thought of what we often call as a plan B, something to do if our original plan doesn't work. And we want to be as specific as possible. We try when developing a strategic plan not to use language that is opaque, even colloquial language. We want to be quite specific. For instance, if sales do not increase by 20% within 1 year, bonuses will be cut by 40%. We want to do the research so that that could be stated, which leads us to effective strategic planning. So in order to develop the best strategy, to have a process that results in what would seem effective strategic planning, there's a couple of aspects that I would follow. One is it has to be based on solid research, not opinion. It's not so much I want or I believe. It's what does the research say? And if we don't have the research, we're going to have to make what we often think is educated guess. But if you know your customers, competition, and marketplace, you're in a better position to know where the organization is. And then after you do that, remember the word compensable, which means that you have a competitive advantage that actually works. And so if you develop a great car, and it's maybe the most technologically advanced car that's ever been created, and it's supposed to be for the masses, for the average person, but the starting price is $60,000 or $80,000, most people won't buy it, even though the car is an amazing specimen, it may not be successful. In some ways it won't, because they haven't assessed the market. They have a competitive advantage that's not compensable. It's great that they have a car that is technologically advanced, but no one could afford it. Third, about strategic plans. We used to do strategic plans every 5 to 10 years. Now we're saying you should be doing them every year. You don't finish a strategic plan and then put it on a shelf. Our goal is to continue to revise a strategic plan. So it's iterative. Once you've completed it, you almost have to start over. It should be short and to the point. Some of them are 200 and 300 pages long, which I think is too comprehensive. But you should have some broad outlines of where the organization is tending to go. You have to have the guts or the courage to make the right call. It could result in layoffs or payoffs, pay cuts. So strategic planning, determining where you need to go, may mean that what you're doing now won't work. As a result, you have to make difficult decisions. But along that line, along the road that you follow, hopefully it's also fun and inspiring. Not just because an organization wants to make money and people in the organization wants to make money, but it has to have those wow factors that people say, I want to be a part of that. I want to change that. I want to create this for the better. The more that we can think in those terms about our future, the better chance that we have people who will follow where we want to go. So there we have some thoughts on strategy. I certainly look forward to hearing your perspectives as well. Everybody enjoy the day. Take care.